The forest was silent that evening, so silent that even the river seemed to whisper instead of roar. The sun had just dipped behind the ridgeline, leaving streaks of orange fading into a heavy purple sky. And that's when Alex, a young traveler passing through the Cascades, saw it. At first, he thought it was nothing more than a dark boulder resting by the river's edge. But then it moved. Slowly, deliberately. A massive bear stood there, its fur damp from the mist, its head tilted slightly toward the water. Yet something about the sight was wrong. The animal wasn't fishing. It wasn't foraging. It wasn't even drinking. It was just standing still, silent, unblinking, like it was waiting. Alex froze, his boots crunching against the gravel. His heart thudded in his chest. Every instinct screamed, "Don't get closer." But he couldn't look away. Minutes passed. The bear didn't move, didn't charge, didn't even acknowledge him. It was as if the beast had been rooted to that very spot for centuries. The river rushed past, but the bear remained still as stone. Alex's breath fogged in the cold evening air. He whispered under his breath, Why is it just standing there?" Somewhere deep inside, curiosity overpowered fear. The locals had warned him of strange stories, a lone bear seen by the river at twilight, a creature tied to a legend most dismissed as folklore. And now here he was, staring at it with his own eyes. But the question that pressed harder than fear was simple: what was it waiting for? What would you do in this moment? Turn back and stay safe, or follow a wild bear into the unknown? Years before Alex ever set foot near that river, an old man had walked those same banks. His name was Samuel Gray, a fisherman who had lived alone for more years than he cared to count. The river was his companion, its waters his lifeline. One autumn evening, when the air carried the bite of early frost, Samuel spotted movement among the reeds. At first he thought it was just driftwood caught in the current. But then came a sound, thin, desperate, almost human. A cry. He pushed aside the brush and found it, a bear cub. Small, trembling, ribs sharp against its skin. Its mother was nowhere to be seen. Poachers had been in the valley that week. Samuel knew what that meant. The cub staggered weakly, then collapsed on the damp earth. Samuel, hardened by years of solitude, felt something shift inside him. Logic said, "Leave it." Instinct said, "Walk away." But his heart refused. That night, he carried the little creature home in an old fishing net. He laid it near the fire, fed it scraps of trout, and watched as life slowly flickered back into its eyes. For days he nursed it, warming milk, feeding bits of bread, even humming to it as if it were a child. The cub grew stronger. When Samuel opened the door, it no longer limped, it explored, sniffing the world with newfound courage. And soon when Samuel cast his fishing line, the cub sat nearby, tilting its head, watching every movement with wide, curious eyes. The old fisherman chuckled to himself. "Guess I've got an apprentice now." And in that quiet bond, between a lonely man and an orphaned cub, something unspoken began to grow. If you were in Samuel's place, would you have saved that cub, knowing it might one day grow into a dangerous predator? Or would you have walked away? Seasons shifted like pages in a book. The fragile cub Samuel had once carried in a net was no longer small. Each spring, it grew stronger, its legs sturdy, its fur thick, its playful swipes carrying more force than the old man's arm could withstand. But Samuel wasn't afraid. No, he was proud. Every morning, the pair made their way to the river. Samuel with his fishing rod, the bear padding close behind. At first, the cub would sit clumsily on the rocks, splashing at minnows with no success. But with time, it learned. By watching Samuel's patience, his stillness, the bear too began to wait for the right moment. And when it finally lunged, jaws breaking the surface, it came up with a wriggling silver trout. Samuel laughed so loudly that the whole valley seemed to echo it back. "That's it, lad. You've got it." Their days became a rhythm, fishing, wandering the woods, sitting by the fire in quiet companionship. Though Samuel never named the bear, he always said wild things should not be tamed. He spoke to it as if it were an old friend. And the bear listened. Always listened. Yet as the cub became a full-grown creature, something else was changing. Samuel's hands, once steady, began to tremble. His cough lingered longer each winter. Climbing the riverbank left him breathless. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Samuel sat on his porch and whispered, "You'll outlive me, old friend. The river will be yours long after I'm gone." The bear lay a few paces away, massive now, but still with the same watchful eyes. It tilted its head, almost as if it understood. And for the first time, Samuel felt a pang of sorrow. Because love, he realized, carried with it an unspoken promise. One day, one of them would have to say goodbye. Have you ever loved something knowing one day you'd have to let it go? Would you still hold on, or protect yourself from the pain? The winter Samuel never returned to the river was the harshest the valley had seen in decades. Snow pressed heavy on the pines, the river froze at its edges, and the fisherman's cabin sat dark and silent. Inside, Samuel's chair remained by the fire, his boots still by the door. But the man himself was gone. The old fisherman's life ended quietly, far from crowds or fanfare, leaving behind nothing but a cabin full of memories. Yet outside, down by the riverbank, one soul refused to accept it. The bear. Each dawn, it came lumbering from the forest, padding through the frost, and settling in the same place where it had once watched Samuel cast his line. Hours would pass. The river moved, the light shifted, but the bear never wavered. It sat. It waited. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into seasons. Spring returned, melting the ice, filling the air with the scent of pine. Still, the bear remained. Waiting. Travelers began to notice. At first, hunters whispered of a massive beast haunting the waters. Later, hikers spoke of a strange sight, a bear that never attacked, never roamed far, never left the river at dusk. They called it the ghost bear, a spirit bound to the waters, waiting for something no one could name. Years passed. Children grew into adults, stories grew into legends, but the bear's ritual never broke. Rain or snow, sun or fog, it always returned to that same bend of the river. Some said it was instinct. Others claimed it was madness. But those who saw it up close felt something different, an ache, a longing. As if the creature carried grief the way humans do. What do you believe? Can animals truly grieve like us, or is it only survival and habit? The legend of the ghost bear had reached Alex long before he ever set foot in the valley. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones around diner tables and campfires. A creature that returned to the same riverbank at dusk. A creature bound to something, or someone. Most who heard the story laughed it off as folklore. But Alex, curious, restless, always searching for truths hidden in shadows, decided to see for himself. That evening, as the sky dimmed into twilight, he found it. The bear stood there exactly as described, unmoving, its massive form reflected in the silver water. It neither hunted nor roamed. Just waited. Alex's pulse hammered in his ears. Instinct screamed, "Keep your distance." But something deeper pulled at him. This wasn't the stance of a predator. It was the posture of something, remembering. Then, for the first time, the bear moved. Slowly, heavily, it turned from the river and began to walk toward the forest. Its paws sank into the moss, silent but sure. And Alex, against all reason, followed. Branches clawed at his jacket, the forest swallowing the last rays of sunlight. The bear moved steadily ahead, never looking back, as if it already knew he was there. Every few steps, Alex whispered to himself, "What am I doing? What am I doing?" Minutes stretched into an hour. Then, at last, the bear stopped. Through the trees, a cabin appeared. Old, weather-beaten, half swallowed by vines. Its roof sagged, its windows clouded with dust, but it still stood. The bear lowered itself onto the earth, settling like a guardian before the threshold. Its great head turned once toward Alex, eyes dark, deep, unreadable. Then it looked back at the cabin. And Alex realized, the bear hadn't led him to danger. It had led him to a memory. If it were you, would you have followed the bear into the woods, or stayed back at the river where it was safe? The cabin was silent. Its wood groaned softly as if sighing under the weight of years. Alex hesitated at the door, his breath shallow, his hand hovering over the rusted latch. Behind him, the bear waited, unmoving, its massive form like a sentinel in the twilight. With a push, the door creaked open. Dust swirled in the fading light, settling on a world long abandoned. Fishing nets hung in the corner, brittle and frayed. A pair of boots rested by the fireplace, untouched. On the wooden table, yellowed photographs curled at the edges, images of a man smiling by the river, sometimes alone. Sometimes with a shadowy blur that could only be a cub at his side. Alex's chest tightened. He could almost see it, an old fisherman sitting in that chair, casting a line, humming softly, with a small bear cub watching at his feet. The air was heavy with memory. He turned back. The bear still sat outside, gazing at the cabin. Not at Alex. Not at the forest. At the cabin. As if it too remembered. As if it too had carried the weight of a bond that time could not erase. Alex understood then. The bear hadn't waited by the river for food, or out of instinct. It had waited for him. For the man who once showed it kindness. For the fisherman who had given it life. And though that man was long gone, the bear kept the vigil. Loyal. Unyielding. Faithful to the very end. Alex stepped out, his eyes meeting the creature's. For a long breathless moment, man and beast simply regarded each other. Not as enemies. Not as strangers. But as two beings who both understood what it meant to carry love beyond loss. Then, with a low rumble that was almost a sigh, the bear turned and faded back into the forest, swallowed by shadow. The cabin remained. The river flowed. The legend lived on. What do you think? Was it memory alone that bound the bear to that river? Or something greater, love, loyalty, and a grief too deep to fade?